Everything you have learned, written, or created has an expiration date. Paper rots, hard drives fail, and the data clouds where you store your pictures and movies will eventually go offline as if they never existed. Even stone crumbles into dust. But what if I told you that someone has written a message that will outlast the earth itself? I'm not speaking metaphorically. This glass slide right here looks simple enough, but inside is a living organism, and it's called Deinococcus radiodurans. And in this particular suspension is one example of the Xenotext, a bacterium into which a poem has been encoded. A bacterium so tough it can survive the vacuum of space. And I'm not kidding, woven into this bacterium is a poem you can read in this book. And because of where this poem now lives, it is officially the most durable piece of literature in the universe. This is the Xenotext, and it is the result of a poet deciding to teach himself genetic engineering as part of a mission to save humanity's most important art from the death of our sun. And I do mean our most important art, because poetry has been so essential to transmitting the information we humans have used to survive. And I also do mean a poet, not a scientist at $1 billion lab, although this is a poet who has become a scientist, and probably the most interesting poet alive. Someone skilled and interesting in more ways than we have time to discuss today, because today our focus is on why Christian Book, the author of the Xenotext, decided to teach himself genetic engineering from scratch, how he did it, and what this epic feat of self-education and unstoppable dedication can teach us about completing our own ambitious projects. So this is the story of a man who decided to stop writing on fragile paper, at least some of the time, and start writing into the biological matter of a radiation-proof, unkillable, literally deathless bacterium. He spent years mastering skills that shouldn't go together, combining poetry with biological chemistry and many other skills to successfully create a poem that will survive, at least theoretically, and probably most likely, the heat death of our sun. So I hope you're ready for a masterclass in radical autodidacticism, which means to teach yourself, because today I'm going to show you the exact impossible learning strategies Christian Book used to turn himself from a poet with a couple of English degrees into a bioengineer, so you can apply these lessons to your own career. And that's so important, because if you want to operate at the top of your game, you've got to stop staying in your lane. You need to become polymathic. And with more and more distractions rising each and every day, you need strategies that make you resistant and as durable as a deathless bacterium in the face of distraction. So the music and the poetry within you gets expressed at the highest possible level during this lifetime, no matter how hard your dream project seems. Now, to understand how a poet ends up hacking the genome of a bacterium, you have to understand the specific type of mind we're dealing with. Christian Book doesn't just write poems. I mean, obviously not, if you see the slide I'm sharing in my hand. He often sets up seemingly impossible goals and then finds a way to make them happen. For example, one of his previous books, Eunoia, is a lipogram. That means each chapter uses only one vowel. Chapter A, for example, uses only the letter A. Chapter E uses only E, I uses only I, etc. So this constraint leads to lines like, awkward grammar appalls a craftsman, a data bard as daft as a raw damn stagnant art, and scrawls an alpha. I think I remembered that correctly. Every word in that sentence has only the vowel A. And to take another example from the I chapter that I memorized, Writing is inhibiting, sighing I sit, scribbling in ink, this pigeon script I sing with nihilistic witticism, and on and on and on. And every word there has only the vowel I. Now, if you haven't read the whole of Eunoia, I know that this might sound a bit like a gimmick, but it's not a gimmick at all. It's one of my favorite books. And in fact, Eunoia won the 2002 Canadian Griffin Poetry Prize, which is a big deal. There's a fair amount of change that comes with that. And one reason why Eunoia has been such a successful book is not only because that beautiful word means beautiful thinking, but there's more than just that constraint of using only one vowel per chapter. There are other constraints we won't get into, but you can hear and feel the textures of your own mother tongue, in this case, English for me, and it is completely new to you as you read the poem, and it's fun to memorize, so don't miss it. For the Xenotext project, which involves two books, Book 1 and Book 2, they're both packed with ingenious and delightful uses of language. Book wondered if it would be possible to discover the rules and constraints that would enable himself and conceivably other poets in the future, if they wanted to become scientific as writers, how that you might encode poetry into a living organism, just like the one that's encaptured in this microscopic slide. To encode poetry into a living organism. That leads to a fascinating question about memory that many mnemonists have tackled, even if they're not fully aware of it. Can a poem outlive the civilization that produced it? When you think about Homer writing whatever he wrote and however he wrote it, we don't know all the full details, but part of that impulse is to take lines and wisdom of Peleus' son Achilles, sing, O Muse, the vengeance deep and deadly, and move it past the civilization that created it into our own. And so I've memorized those lines, and theoretically that helps them move forward. But if humans are no longer around, how on earth would that work? Because if the sun is going to burn out, it's inevitable. Now, as far as I can understand the Xenotext project, and I have to admit, I don't really know that I follow even a shred of the science that's involved in the Xenotext project, but part of it had to do with imagining the project itself, followed by learning how would it be possible for a poem to live inside of a cell, and which kind of cell would do the job of protecting the poetry. Well, it turns out that there's an extremophile called Deinococcus radiodurans, and it was listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most radiation-resistant bacterium on planet Earth. Now, as a life form, its DNA was sequenced and published in 1999, and according to the Wikipedia page on the Xenotext, Book started conceiving of encoding poetry into DNA and then inserting it into the bacterium circa 2002. But I don't know, it's Wikipedia, right? So did the chicken come first or the egg come first? I don't know. But the project is ultimately more than just having poetry persist within a cell so that it can transmit the work without errors later. It's a kind of combinatory puzzle in which the bacterium acts as a kind of co-author. So this is complicated, and I don't really quite know that I understand it, but the idea is that part of what happens is when you encode material into the Deinococcus radiodurans, that process causes a second poem to be produced. And in order to pull this project off, Book needed to enlist the help of scientists while mastering multiple skills many people would not normally consider writing. And so this project has changed what writing is. And as we head into the future, we definitely need to start doing this kind of different writing and thinking about memory differently. To this day, many educators talk about the importance of being a specialist. But the Xenotext project interests me so much because of how it's changed the idea of what writing is and what memory is, and the work that book put into pulling it off kind of forces us to also redefine what's possible as self-directed learners in the 21st century. So let's get into the parts of this. When Book decided to encode a poem into the DNA of an extremophile bacterium, he's not just dabbling in science or exploring various interests as a multipotentialite. And multipotentialite, in case you haven't heard that, is kind of like this buzzword going around that is, in a way, giving people the excuse that they can just follow their random interests as dabblers and become jacks of all trades without ever owning it, without ever going deep. So this isn't about reading a few pop-sci books and then expecting an organism to write a poem in return because you fantasized about it. No, Christian Book spent many years studying genomic and proteomic, I think you say, engineering. He literally coded his own computer program to help unearth the poetry that would go into a cell that would then cause the cell to create another poem, all while writing grants and collaborating with multiple experts. Now, forgive me if I've not described it correctly. It's quite mind-melting to think about it, at least for this brain. But that's part of the joy and the pleasure of reading about it. And if you're a lifelong learner with big dreams who wants to work on things that are so complex even just to understand, it's really useful to look at people with autodidactic and polymathic tendencies and personality traits and figure out how they operate. So I want to pause here for a second because we are talking about these kinds of people on this channel. I'm talking about people who do deep, rigorous work, the kind that takes years, not seconds. And frankly, the online algos often push the kind of depth that I want to talk about away in favor of quick 60-second dopamine hits. So if you believe that the future belongs to deep thinkers and the polymaths who take risks with their time and with their effort, not the skimmers, not the scammers, not the scanners, please get subscribed right now to this channel and hit that thumbs up for the love of memory. It's really the only way we have these days to signal to the machines that you want hard knowledge, not just easy entertainment. And if you're ready to reject the quick hack mindset, tell me in the comments what the impossible skill is that you want to master. Get it in writing, because part of the Xenotext story is that writing is produced by writing. And if you can write it into yourself, then you could potentially get yourself to write the next step that you need to take in order to be the architect of your dreams. Now, with that in mind, let's look at the specific skill stack that I've analyzed in the Xenotext project and what Book did to pull it off to help you accomplish your own seemingly impossible goals. One of the first skills is literally just to allow yourself to dream big. Now, giving yourself permission to dream might not seem like a skill, but we know that we can model other people. And many polymaths who inspire us, well, you probably won't be surprised that many of them dream, and they don't particularly stop themselves from it. They daydream all the time, or they deliberately dream. So if you think about Einstein and relativity, he used daydreaming rather deliberately in order to come up with those revelations. And it's quite common in physics and in all kinds of sciences to use the imagination. So picking a dream and pursuing it despite any obstacles that you can also anticipate is a skill, because thinking past the obstacle or thinking through all the obstacles is not just what Stoics do in philosophy, it's what scientists have to do also. And in some sense, anything you want to accomplish is an experiment. So you have to allow yourself to experiment even just with the idea itself. And once you've got a project that you've given yourself permission to think through, the next step is to take a cue from people who break their goals down into the most basic steps. Now, one problem that a lot of people have is their all or nothing attitude, right? They're just like, well, if I can't figure this out in the next 5 minutes, I'm out of here. I've heard this so many times. It's just like, well, I want the easy memory techniques, and if I can't figure it out like tomorrow, done, right? Well, this is not going to work, right? You can't have an all or nothing attitude. You got to break things down. And no matter how unusual or unlikely your dream might be, and it may turn out to be impossible, it's still a useful exercise to think, how can I break this down to its smallest component parts? And a sub-step or a component of this kind of experimental attitude, where you're going to break things down, is to try to also break down your existing skill set and find out what you're most competent with right now. Because then you can try and work out, well, I don't have this skill set, so I need to get that. And then what are the little steps that I'll take in order to achieve those skills so that my existing competence grows, and then you increase the likelihood of success. So in Book's case, I believe that he wrote Eunoia back in the day by culling words manually from dictionaries over many years, from what I understand. So he couldn't brute force the Xenotext in that way due to all of the biological chemistry involved and the mass amount of words. Like, there's a huge number of possible words that could be encoded into DNA and codons and really all this super specific science stuff that I haven't really quite computed yet in my brain. But he had to think about it in a new way, and there's no way to go through a dictionary to find all these words. He had to think of it as a computational linguist. So my point here is that the originality of the Xenotext project is secured. It's just a wild idea that's completely unique. But I also think it's helpful to recognize that the Xenotext is not entirely divorced from the skills Book already had and was using to create the book Eunoia, and sentences like, a hand stamp that can stamp a wax pad, that at last plants a mark that sparks an Ars Magna. Like, all those words that only have the vowel A in them, they had to be found in a dictionary, and then his skill set for finding those kinds of words evolves, and now he creates a software program that helps him match it to the point that he can do biological engineering. So that's part of the skill, is like drawing upon what it is that exists already in your competence set and then building on it rather than trying to do something completely new all the time. And this is something that relates to what Waqas Ahmed talks about in the Polymath, a book where he raises an interesting point. There's a couple of interesting points. One is the idea of the platform. And I apologize, I used that term, the platform, previously, and I didn't credit it to Ahmed, which is where I got it from this book. Citations sometimes come later. But the idea of the platform, part of it has to do with drawing upon your existing competence. And part of it also, in Christian Book's case, is that he is a scholar and academic, so he has these relationships already with how to research, how to network with researchers, etc. But there's another aspect here in this book that Ahmed calls synesthetic thinking. And I might be stretching the relationship here a bit further than Ahmed means, but let's go with it. Synesthetic thinking is not to be mistaken with synesthesia, but there is a relationship here. And it's the idea of imagining an outcome through at least one other sense. This is a skill. And how exactly you're going to apply it to your career, I don't know. I can go on and on about how I do these kinds of things in my own. But in Book's case, I think the Xenotext involves imagining the use of living beings other than humans as being part of art, and then sort of figuring out what kind of creature would be able to decode that in the future. So it is a sensation of what it would be like to receive a deathless bacterium in space and then go, what is this? And then we might want to try and open this up and see what's inside, right? That is imagining the sensation of discovery as part of the work that would enable the work to have meaning in the first place. So the idea of reaching a sufficiently intelligent civilization that has computers fast enough or brains fast enough and really super smart cryptographers that can work this all out. This is the skill of sensing beyond our own species and then taking the risk of trying to reach them, but after having imagined the possibility first. In other words, you break out of your own cage and allow yourself to use the platform of your existing competence to figure out the journey of how that you're going to reach possibilities that you have imagined feeling as a sense. So what on earth does this have to do with memory other than the transmission of ancient poetry through memorization? Well, I have a confession to make, and I think it's a very important one. One of the reasons I'm so fascinated by the Xenotext project is that my memory is actually incredibly weak. That's why I use mnemonics with such passion, because they actually give me a chance to remember stuff that otherwise would just be in one ear and out the other. And, mileage varies depending on how tired I am or how well I'm feeling, etc. And recently I had a chance to interview Christian Book, and, I consider him really to be one of the most rigorous intellects alive. And in a weird kind of fanboy moment, I'm reciting one of the poems from book 1 of the Xenotext. And for all the mnemonics in the world, even though I recited it quite a few times before, I just choked. Now, sometimes this happens because I have mouth problems and things get a bit sticky. Other times it's truly exhaustion. And in this particular case, it was quite late in the evening for me. But it's a mystery to me that puzzles me, and I imagine all the time, like, how could it be possible to always have perfect recall no matter how tired you are, so that you could recite poems with no problem at all, even if your mouth is sticky, right? And I'm mentioning this human moment of falling flat on my face in front of someone that I really admire and wouldn't want to botch his poetry at all, right? Because I have this deep need, of course, to confess, I guess, but I'm sharing this fragile, ephemeral moment to prove a point. In that split second where my biological hard drive glitched, I demonstrated exactly why we need something like the Xenotext and everything it implies for what might be possible if we push deeper into this idea of encoding poetry and preserving it so it can be flawlessly extracted from cellular matter. Because our brains fail, but the cell that Book has written into will not. And it suggests that while human life is fragile, life itself might be the most durable storage and retrieval device in the universe. And so to see the Xenotext project come to life, because I've been following it for a very long time, and to see it actually succeed after all the years that Book has pushed through multiple struggles, inspires me in countless ways. And this project strikes me as the ultimate memory strategy that humanity itself could make, and the idea that one person puts so much time into it, so many resources, is just incredible. And as Book reminded me during our discussion, poetry was a technology long before writing existed. Rhythm, rhyme, and meter aren't just part of the ancient art of poetry. They are engineering tools that helped ensure information survives the game of telephone across generations. But Book isn't inventing a new game so much as he's upgrading the hardware. And in his own words,
the work, of course, addresses the subject of the role that art, or poetry in particular, might play in the deep time of the cosmos, the degree to which the things that we make might endure long after we've died, and to what degree we can testify to our existence on the planet over epochal time. Lots of poets, of course, pay some lip service to the idea that life is short, but art is long. Nevertheless, none of them have ever actually attempted to immortalize poetry quite literally, even though we may, pay thematic lip service to the fact that poetry constitutes a way to conceivably immortalize our cultural experience. Certainly, the existence of every single civilization on the planet owes a debt of gratitude, perhaps, to the invention of poetry, because it is, in fact, the very means by which modern forms of civilization have, in fact, transmitted their embryonic initial cultural formations, from one generation to the next. We probably owe every religious grimoire, to the poets. We certainly owe every great epic story of the sort, like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Iliad, stories that were intended, of course, to transmit important cultural information over long periods of time. We need poets to be able to create that work and make it memorable enough and enduring enough to persist over time. Certainly, without the invention of something like songlines in Aboriginal cultures, we wouldn't have much evidence of human expression that would be perhaps longer than 5,000 or 6,000 years old. We need poetry, I think, in part to provide a lasting legacy for our experience so far. Most of our literary output has, of course, been lost to time. Probably well over 99% of human writing has, up until now, been lost. And poetry has at least played some small role in ensuring that that remaining small percentage doesn't go unnoticed.
Think about that. Until his work on the Xenotext succeeded, we had nothing to rely on apart from our brains, assisted by techniques like the memory palace or prosthetic devices like silicon chips. But the computers and the servers we now use to store our collective memories in are still subject to rot. Just as much rot as paper, really. And this, I think, changes everything. It suggests that memory is not a property exclusive to the human mind, but a living force of its own. And in a way, the Xenotext proves that language has always been a kind of beneficial virus that has always been encoded into our species. And so it has now finally found a host durable enough to survive the extinction of its original carrier. And at the risk of a bad pun, to pull this off, Book himself had to become an intellectual extremophile himself. So let's bring all of this together and talk about how you can develop your own polymathic persistence so you're also failure resistant as you work to achieve your goals. Listening to me now, you might be thinking, oh, well, I'm just a student, or I'm just a writer, or I'm just a this or that. Well, Book could have thought that too. But as he told me,
my assumption was that I've got training in English literature. I have 3 degrees in the subject. And that would imply to me that if I'm encountering a text that's written in English, I should be able to understand it or appreciate it, figure it out, right? No matter what the discipline or the discourse. Obviously, in order to embark upon such a project, I had to acquire a whole new set of skills, familiarize myself with a lot of very difficult discourses, and acquire a lot of talents far beyond the catechism of my training.
Obviously. But it's not obvious for all of us. We sometimes do the thinking, but we don't take action. He did. He made the decision to step outside of that lane, join other innovators who have done the same, and become scientific by seeing the possibilities and then laying out what the steps were that are needed to make it happen. So how you engage in a project that takes decades without burning out comes down to, I think, the 3 clues that Book gave me. The first is to embrace the unknown, because these projects have unknown unknowns. And Book told me that if he had known how hard the project would be, he might not have started. He called this his saving grace. Yet how many times do we turn away from our dreams because we don't know the size of the mountain? Nelson Dellis told me something similar once about memory training. He's not just a memory champion, 6 times he's won the USA memory competition, but also a climber who has summited Mount Everest. And Nelson said, you don't have to worry about whether the top of the mountain is there or not. You just focus on where you're going to place your hands next. So that's the first step. You don't really have to worry about the unknown unknowns. You know that there are going to be unknowns. And your saving grace is just kind of ignoring it or being ignorant of it and taking action anyway. The second thing is to focus on incremental achievement. So even as Book's project threw new obstacles at him, he told me.
But those tasks I undertook one step at a time. I gave myself accomplishments or achievements that were incremental, that I knew I could probably fulfill, and would embark upon those doable tasks in an effort to acquire the rest of the required skill set in order to accomplish the remainder of these tasks.
In other words, he stacked a bunch of tasks on top of each other and kept stacking until he had built a ladder to the impossible. And then third, the idea of tunneling through the noise.
Certainly when I overcame something that was impossible, there was a point at which I had spent 4 years trying to figure out how to write just the two poems themselves, according to a constraint which is considered undoable. It's completely impossible. I thought that having overcome that particular challenge, the rest would be easier by comparison. And as it turned out, overcoming that first hurdle was not the hardest task. The subsequent task got progressively harder. And in each case, when I overcame that otherwise impossible task, I really did believe that perhaps the next step would, by virtue of the accomplishments beforehand, prove easier. So I guess there's some sunk cost that require you to continue, right? If I've gotten this far, I better push through, right? If you're going through hell, keep going, right? Don't stop, right? Because otherwise you're in hell. If you stop, just keep going, try to tunnel through. I think that that's really what I ended up doing, was learn the skill sets required incrementally, overcome each of the challenges that I was faced with imminently, deal with that, and then use those subsequent achievements to figure out how to do the next step. And bear in mind, I suppose, with some faith, that in my case, language was resilient enough or flexible enough, inventive enough on its own to be able to accomplish what would otherwise appear to be utterly impossible tasks.
Book's work definitely makes a big statement in all three of these regards of skill to keep going, to accomplish your dreams. And it makes a big splash when it comes to what poetry is, what poetry was, and what poetry can be and probably will be in the future. But for me, it's also a statement about memory and about human potential. The Xenotext challenges us to stop thinking of human brains and computers in relationship, especially now where a lot of people think that the brain has been eclipsed by the computer as the ultimate storage and retrieval device. Really, this project, in my mind, places our attention squarely back onto the relationship between poetry and life, and the aspects of language that in so many ways were always already a technology infecting our cells. If you want to become a polymath yourself and enjoy a legacy that lasts, using the technology of language as part of what drives you to remember more and to put what you learn into action, you must be willing to endure what Book described to me as
about 36 different side quests.
36 standing in for just, countless things that come up while you're working on complex projects. You've got to be willing to look at all kinds of subjects and skills that seem impossible and learn them anyway. And if you're ready to start your own impossible learning project, I have a guide that will help you develop your own curriculum and make sure that what's on it actually needs to be there. It's called the Self-Education Blueprint. It will help you transform scattered curiosity into tightly interwoven levels of activity that leads you to accomplishment. The link is in the description. And once you've gone through it, I think you'll find that the knowledge that you accumulate in our world of constant things to gather, links to save, and things to order and maybe read one day, I think you're going to find that you not only start to put more of it into use for your own benefit, but you'll dream bigger and think bigger about how all of that can help other people too. Now, obviously Christian Book is a unique case and this is a very unique project, but the specific traits and lessons that allowed him to push through years of failure and challenges isn't unique to him. And thankfully, far from it. There's actually many people who have additional habits that we can learn from, and I cover a lot of them on this channel. So again, get subscribed if you want more of that kind of inspirational, in-depth discussion of what people did, not just what drove them or what personality types they have, etc., but the actual strategies they used. And there's one more habit that separates almost all self-taught geniuses from the rest of the pack. I break down exactly what that habit is and how you can install it in your own brain starting today by watching this habit separate self-taught geniuses from everyone else next. With thanks, as always, for your interest and support of the Magnetic Memory Method Initiative. Go ahead, watch that video next. And as I always like to say, until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.